Okay. So when we left off, we see that even before there's been any eating or touching of any forbidden fruit, that there's something that's already becoming maybe warped in the woman's perspective. You know, that she's not seeing the world rightly. You know, she's misidentifying where the center of the garden is. She's exaggerating the what's forbidden and minimizing what's permitted and the consequences of disobedience. And so there's already something going on there. And the serpent doesn't waste any time, like really jumps in. Because remember, he's starting to imply something. And we're probably wondering, what is his point? You know, why is he saying, though God said? And that's literally what it says. Many of your translations will put it somewhere, phrase this differently, because it's weird in Hebrew, it's awkward. But the emphasis on what the serpent starts this whole conversation is he seems to be saying, don't pay attention to what God says. And what is his point? And so I think we have to wait to figure that out. But he does have a point. He's not just saying disobey for the sake of disobeying. Like, that's silly. That's not a clever plot. I'm just going to come up to you and say, hey, you want to go run stop signs with me? You know, like, he has to have a point. Like, there has to be, like, what is his point? And we'll have to wait to see what that is. But her response is like, no, you know, because he phrases it like wrong, like you shall not eat of any tree in the garden, which is totally wrong, right? He's misrepresented what God said. And so she jumps on like, oh, I'm going to correct you. And she says a lot more about her own heart in her statement, as she does about anything else. And so then he jumps on it. And he's like, because she says, you know, we might die, maybe. And he's like, you for sure won't die. Like, for sure. Let me just eliminate that possibility from your mind right now, woman. Let me tell you what's really going on. And this is really interesting because he says, he seems to think that he knows actually more about God than she does. And this is maybe our first clue that maybe this creature is more than just a talking snake. Because he says that he's got special insight into the workings in the mind of God. He's like, this is what God knows. God knows that when you eat it, your eyes are going to be opened and you'll actually be like God, knowing good and bad. God knows what's good and bad. We've seen that already in this story, right? He's the one who decides what's good and what's not good. And if you eat this tree, you'll be just like that. You'll be able to know what's good and what's bad. Now, what's so wrong with that? Like we never actually usually ask that question when we read this story. What's so wrong with that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But like, can you imagine, and this is hard, this is like, you know, a mental exercise. Can you imagine what it would be like to not know good from bad? Just try to imagine that. Try to imagine what it'd be like to be you, but you actually don't know the difference between good and bad.
Everything will be relying on faith now. Now you have to step out since you don't know what's good and bad. Just only can have faith.
You could. We actually have a word. Did you know that? We have a word for people that don't know the difference, literally don't know the difference between good and bad. We call those sociopaths. Seriously, I'm not joking. Yeah, right? Because there are people that have a condition where they literally, like, you interview some of these horrible, like, serial killers, and they literally, like, they'll tell you, like, they didn't know it was wrong to murder that person. It seemed in the time like, you know, they were just going off of instinct and the emotion of the situation, and one thing led to another. And they didn't, like, whether it was right or wrong to kill that person never entered their mind. They didn't deliberate it. They didn't make a choice. They just did. They acted on their instinct. That's what not knowing what good. So, like, we want to like over spiritualize this and make it into, something else, because otherwise it almost sounds like the serpent has a point. Was the serpent telling the truth? We're going to see in the story, now the serpent says that they won't actually drop down dead if they eat the fruit. What the serpent says, instead of dropping down dead, their eyes will be opened and they'll be able to know good and bad. Is that a lie? No. Like, we're going to read the story like we might expect, oh, he's totally lying. But we're going to find out he was telling the truth. Now, he was lying here, or at least misrepresenting what God said here. And he misrepresents what God said, and so he's probably misrepresenting what God knows. How does he know what God knows? He can't even get what God said right. But everything else he says seems to be, like when we turn the page, the truth. And if it was the truth, then I'm kind of wondering, did the serpent have a point? Why did God want us to be in this state of just not knowing good and bad? So here's what people way smarter than me who, studied this stuff for generations and generations, having conversations about this story, they ask this question. When they end up eating of the tree, is it true that before they ate from the tree, they didn't actually know good from bad? Because think about it, right? God told them, like, how did they know that it was bad to eat from the tree? How did they know that it was bad to eat from the tree if they didn't actually already know what was good and bad? What? So did eating from the tree actually change anything? Or maybe another way, did eating from the tree give them suddenly that knowledge that they didn't have before, or did it do something else? Have we misunderstood what the tree did? Because clearly the tree did do something, because we'll see there's some consequences and there's a big change, and their eyes are opened. And what does that mean that their eyes are open? They now see the world in a completely different way than they saw it before. And this is where like the thought exercise becomes a little difficult, because we're trying to imagine what was the pre-tree human experience like? What changed? Because I actually don't think this serpent is the truth teller. And so what actually changed about them? Was it that she didn't know it was wrong? Because if she didn't know it was wrong, why did they all get punished? Why is it such serious business that they did wrong if they weren't allowed to know what was right and wrong? So clearly they were allowed to know what was right and wrong. But something changed about their perception of the world and good and bad, and their understanding of their reality and all of that. Something does change. So let's keep reading and see if we can figure out the answers to those questions. But I think those are the questions at this point in the story, like the author's teasing out of us, like to ask that. If we're really thinking about the story and being critical about the story, like what in the world is going on here? And so here we see like the classic temptation moment, right? So the woman, she sees that the tree was good for food and that it was attractive to the eyes and that the tree was desired to give insight. I've heard another way to phrase that in the Hebrew that I might like even better. It says, beautiful to contemplate. And so what we have here, so like what is this tree? Like we don't tend to ask a lot of questions about these trees. What is the tree of life? Here's another question. Did they ever eat from the tree? Did they ever get around to eating from the tree of life? The text doesn't say, and actually at the end of the story that we're going to be today, God's going to be like, whoa, we better make sure they never eat from the tree of life now. So the implication seems to be they never even got around to tasting the tree of life. That was on their to-do list, but they didn't get there yet. It's a big garden, maybe. And this other tree had maybe stolen their focus for the moment. And so, we've got a lot of questions about that tree of life. But this tree, it's a tree of knowledge, or I've translated discernment, because it really is about, and it really it's about like experiential kind of knowledge. And it's about a tree of knowing good or discerning good and bad. And we've kind of actually already talked about good way back in chapter 1, right? Because good is good like a concrete, is good like a relative word, or like a concrete, like definitive, like what's good is good. Again, I go back to, is pizza good? I'll go back to that question. Is pizza good? Who likes pizza? Who doesn't like pizza? Thinks it's gross. There's one person, thank you. Brave person. It's not always easy to go against the crowd. Right. So is she wrong? Is it not? Is she wrong? She doesn't think pizza's good. She's wrong. You think she's wrong, but she thinks you're wrong. Right? Right? Some people hate broccoli. Some people think broccoli is amazing. I love broccoli, especially steamed broccoli. Like, I don't even need to put anything on it. I think it's delicious. I know. Is that right? Like, who is factually right? So what the reality is, good and bad to any particular person is colored by what they like and what they don't like. It's colored by what they want. It's colored by their desire. And that's where, Sophia, read that verse again from Proverbs that the Spirit led you to. Desire without knowledge is not good. Oh, and the woman saw the trees, and it was this desire and knowledge. That's actually, that Proverbs is a link back to this story. A lot of stories in the Bible. You'll see, you'll see so much. Once you've thought about these 3 chapters and you read anywhere else in the Bible, you're going to find on any other page of the Bible some hook back to this story. Desire without knowledge. And what was this tree, a tree of knowledge about? What changed in them? Was it, like, look at this tree. Like, it appeals at every level of desire. It's got the good for food, just like the way that I look at an apple pie and think, that looks yummy, right? Like that level, very basic level of desire. Then it's got the attractive to the eyes. It's got some kind of like elegance to it. So it's like a higher level of appeal and desire, more intellectual. And then it's desire to give insight, or beautiful to contemplate, like totally like highbrow, desire, like wonderful, I want to possess it. Like, this is a tree of desire. It's a tree about making decisions, not actually based, it's a lie. The tree is a lie. It's not about knowledge, it's about desire. And it's about, once you have that desire in you, that then rules your definitions of good and bad, it's a whole new world. It's a whole new world. So what is the story implying that the pre-tree humanity was like? We could make decisions, but our decisions weren't based on our desires. We could see something and want something, but recognize that's not good and easily walk away from it. Because how one scholar put it, our paradigm before the tree was not good and bad. It was truth and falsehood. Things were either true or they were not true. And what was true, whatever God wills, that's truth. Whatever God has not willed, that's falsehood. And so we choose what's true, that we make our decisions based on what's true, not based on what we want. And after the tree, we now make decisions based on what we want apart from Christ. Now, what's interesting is, are there creations on the planet right now that totally, all the time, just make decisions all day long based on what they want? And true and false is not even like a thing that they have a concept of. Are there any creatures you can think of like that? I have 3 of them at home. Yeah, my dogs, animals, right? All the beasts of the field. That's their experience. My dog does not care about true and false. My dog cares about, I'm hungry, I want to walk, I want to sleep, I want to play. It's just all driven by want and desire. So when you realize that, you realize, there's multiple reasons why this character is at first, described as a serpent. He's very animal-like. He behaves like an animal. And what he presents to the woman is an animal's perspective on the world. And what he seems to be saying is when he says, though God said, is look, I'm an animal. God probably talks all the time. I don't really understand most of what he says, but I tell you what, I have a desire in me. I want stuff. Where do you think that desire came from? Who put that in me? God made me. And so if I have a voice in me, a desire in me saying, I want, that probably came from God. So shouldn't I? Who cares what God said? I have this other voice in me as an animal that I obey. Why don't you just obey that voice? Don't worry so much about what God said. That's what he is inviting her into. He said, come be an animal with me. Come be an animal. Because this is part of his wanting to replace man. He can't jump the gap and become equal to the man. So he wants to bring the man down to become an animal. If he can bring man down to become an animal like him, now he can win. Play my game. I can't play the human game, but let's play the animal game. I'll win. I'm really good. I'm more clever than all the other animals. And this is why, if we jump straight, and I'm not saying that none of that is true, or we're thinking about that the serpent is also a spiritual being who's intent on deceiving and, attacking the image of God. Like, I'm not saying none of that is true, but we don't want to jump to that too fast, and we want to look at the language that the Bible uses. It uses for a purpose because it's trying to tease out of our minds to ask the right questions, begin thinking about this stuff, that this is really about, this goes all the way back to that very first story and why we have, is humanity just another animal with a higher position of authority? Or are we something totally different? Is there a clear line? Because sometimes it's not obvious when you look at this world, when you interact with other human beings, when we just, how we experience life ourselves. Sometimes we feel like we're just a bunch of animals, slaves to our own urges and our own wants. But the Bible is trying to tell us that is a lie. That is not who you are. It's not what we were made to be. We were made to be masters of our desire, not be mastered by our desire. And in fact, we'll have a whole other story with Cain and Abel that is about this very thing. And about God pleading with the young man, like, this is not who you are. You don't have to give in. And God's not a liar. He's the only character in the story who never lies or misrepresents anything. And so that if God says it, then that means it's true. That means we are not, despite how we might feel, out of control, not able to do the things we know we should do, and giving in to things that we want that we know we shouldn't want. Despite all of that, that's not true. And we have to get back about thinking about reality, back before our eyes were opened to view everything through this lens of desires, and get rid of those lenses and see everything through the lens of truth. What's true and what's not. And I'm going to operate based on truth, not based on my desires. Because what did we learn about God? God is able. Why do you think makes such a big deal about this? It's the seventh day and it's holy. Right? God had a creative desire, but he was able to see the point where his creativity, if allowed to continue, would actually do more damage than good, and he was able to be self-disciplined enough to say, stop, I'm not going to do anymore. And he makes a holiday for all time, for all humanity, that we're going to have a holiday we celebrate every week. That's just about recognizing how important it is to be disciplined and to stop and reflect and enjoy what is already around us. And enjoy relationship with him we've been given the gift of, the blessing of. And when you begin to look at this whole 7 days and you realize that the 7 days are like, this seventh day, and then you have a first day, and that means you'd have a middle piece, so then the middle becomes the fourth day, and the whole fourth day is about, the whole purpose of the fourth day was to give us stuff in the sky so we know what time it was, so we know when to take the Sabbath. Like that's the centerpiece of this whole 7 day cycle, is like revolving around. Like it's all just like the scars revolve around. It's like you gotta know when to stop and how to say no. God knows how to do it. We were made like him. We have it in us to do it. And at this point in time, it was a lot easier. But now that she's thinking about it, now that she's seeing it, and already you can see the desire is rising up in her and already taking over before she's even touched the tree. Oops, let me go. There you go. And so she took, and this is like going to be like the line that gets reused like 100 times in the biblical story. She took of its fruit. She saw that it was good. She took of its fruit and ate. And you're going to see that language. Like, look for that whenever you're reading any story in the Bible where it says, King David looked and he saw Bathsheba and he took her. You'll see that language like over and over and over again. Anytime there's like this classic temptation scene, it's always like going back. It's like it's just a replaying of this over and over and over again. Seeing something that causes a desire to rise up in us, and in that moment, we choose to give desire what it wants, and we take what doesn't belong to us. And there's a diminishment. There's a fall. And so she takes and she ate, and she also gave some to her man. See, they do belong to each other. It's not like he's just her woman or his woman, he's her man, who was with her, and he ate. And a lot of people at this point say, the moral of the story is, you shouldn't let women lead anything. They make bad decisions, or they turn this into like, see, this is what happens when men don't speak up and take authority over the women. That is not at all what I think the text is trying to say. That'll be more clear later on. But just file that away for the moment. And it says, and then the eyes of both were opened. Serpent was right. Their eyes were open. They now see the world differently. But what I would argue is it's not that they now have knowledge that they didn't have before. They now know desire at a level they never experienced before. And then they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. Do you ever wonder why fig leaves? Like, why didn't, if all the things, like, I guess because they're in a garden, right? But, like, what are they trying to do? Like, what do they realize has happened, this transformation? And what are they trying to, in a really lame way, kind of walk back? So if before there was a clear separation, like humanity is not to be primarily compared to animals. On this little grid here, what is humanity supposed to be compared to? Trees, the green stuff. We're supposed to be like a tree. We're supposed to be like a tree. But now they've eaten from the fruit and they suddenly look at each other and they realize we just look like a couple animals now. This is not our identity. We need to go back to looking like trees again. I know, let's slap a bunch of leaves on us. They're putting on a tree costume. That'll make it better. Isn't that wild? They're trying to dress up like a couple of trees. Nope, see, we're still good. We're still a bunch of trees. Then they heard the voice of Yahweh God walking in the garden in the wind of the day. And so in one verse, so you have the voice. So you have voice implies that he's speaking, right? So you have the word of God, and he's walking, he's present, and there's the Spirit of God. So again, there's another quick triune God just right from the very first 3 verses. So they hear him. I always like to wonder, how did God make his entrance whenever he would visit them in the garden? Like I don't know why I always imagine like he's singing. Like they just hear him singing as he's walking through his garden. That's just what I imagine. I don't know if that's right or not, but I just could just see that. That he just breaks out into song because his word is so full of song. And what did the human and the woman do? So they hid themselves from the presence of Yahweh God among the trees of the garden. So where do they hide? In the trees. They dressed up like a tree. See, it's camouflage. They're in their tree costumes. We're just another tree, nothing to see here, right? They know this is bad. Like this is really bad. And now God's here. And, one of my questions is, like, dude, God, if you had just showed up 10 minutes earlier while they were still having the conversation with the snake, none of this happened. Why did God wait till now? Like, surely if God is omniscient, like he knew what was happening, Why does he delay his coming until after they've already screwed things up?
Because he wanted to give them agency of choice.
Yeah, freedom, right? So like, what does it mean for me to say, yeah, you're free, but I'm going to need to okay every move you make? You can make decisions. You can choose what goes on the pizza, but let me see your list, and I'm going to make some adjustments before the order goes in, because I actually don't like anchovies, and they're not going on that pizza. Yeah, well. Right? So like he has, if their freedom is not a joke, if it's not a trick, if they really are free, and they have agency, if they have the dignity, let's put it that way, if God really has given them the dignity of true freedom of choice, how can he not allow them to exercise that freedom? And more sinister still, if God did step in, let's just say like a protective parent, and said, smack that snake out of that garden and said, get away and don't listen to him, right? Once the serpent has already opened the conversation and said what he said, if God interrupts them from following through to test what the serpent has said is true or false about God, and what God has said himself is true or false, won't they spend the rest of eternity wondering, was the snake right? You know, if a being, so here's then we jump to the serpent as a celestial, heavenly being or whatever, an angel of some kind. Somebody shows up and like, you've seen them before. Like, they hang out with God and some of the other angels and stuff that are whenever God shows up, they're hanging out. And he shows up by himself and he's like, hey guys, I know you think God's your friend and all, and he's like your heavenly papa, but let me tell you, he does not have your best interests in mind. Don't trust him. He's out to get you. And then God shows up, kills the snake. Oh, don't listen to him. Let's go, right? Like you're going to be like, was that snake telling the truth, right? How would you ever know? How would you ever know? It would make God seem kind of scary. And so in a way, God had to let them follow through with what they were going to do. But then he spends the rest of this story, the whole rest of this Bible, showing that the snake was lying. Because what the snake was actually attacking was the goodness of God. The snake's ultimate message was God's not really good. He doesn't want what's best for you. He doesn't love you the way I love you. I want what's best for you. Hiss, hiss. And the Bible spends the rest of the story showing that God does love us more than we can possibly imagine. And he is good, better than we ever could possibly dream of. And the whole rest of the story is him proving that, and ultimately proving it in the person of Christ and his sacrifice for us. Okay, so they're hiding in the trees, and they think, they're camouflaged. And Yahweh God calls to them, calls to the human, and he says, where are you? And that might seem like a little strange. Why is God asking where they are? Isn't he God? Doesn't he know where they are? It's not. There's a couple of different words for where in Hebrew. This one is not necessarily like where are you location. It's like where is your head at? It's like what is going on with you? Kind of that. Where are you? Like what has happened to you that you're dressed up like a tree hiding in the bushes? This is not right, what's going on. And so we tend to jump into kind of the funny thing, right? We jump into what the man and the woman say. So he says, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid. I was afraid of you, God, because I was naked. Here's that naked thing again. Like, what is the deal with this nakedness? Like, why do we have to keep being reminded that they're naked? And why is suddenly, now that he's eaten from the tree, because he's naked and he knows he's naked, he's now afraid of God? Like, there's some really messed up stuff happening there. And so God responds with, well, who told you you were naked? Because you've been naked since day one, and that's not been a problem thus far in this story. Have you eaten of the tree which I commanded you not to eat? Remember, there's just one tree. You had all the trees. I was really hoping you'd get to that tree of life eventually. But did you eat the one tree? And so look what he says. The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit of the tree and I ate. It was all her fault. It was all her fault, God. And it was your fault because you made her. Forget that you made her from me. Like, it was, you must have done something wrong. You flipped something. And it's all your fault. And we kind of tend to go on after that and just think, but we never ask, why is God even asking these questions? Like, he already knows what happened. What is he really after when he asks this question? First he asks, a very simple, like, open-ended, like, what's going on with you? And then he follows it up with, okay, so this is what's going on with you. Is this because you did what I told you not to do? Is that why you're so messed up? And his response, of course, is to play the blame game. But what was God, like, just imagine for a moment how a different way the story could have gone. Repentance. Was God giving them a moment? Because we tend to think, oh, this is the only way it could have gone. Of course, that God's asking these questions that he already knows the answers to just because we need more word count in the story. We never think that maybe God is asking these questions because he's trying to prompt a moment of sanity in this man's head and see if he has any repentance at all in his heart. Like, how would the story have been okay if the man at this point had said, God, you're right, I did it. I did it. You said not to eat it. It was super clear. I realized your generous gift of everything in this garden, and I totally turned my back on all of it to have the one thing that you told me not to. And I don't even know what's happened to me now, or how. I just know that everything looks different, and I feel different, and this is wrong. This isn't how I was 5 minutes ago, and I'm so sorry, God. Please forgive me. Is that a possibility? Could he have done that? Was that also a free will choice that he could have made? Totally. Instead, he chooses to play this game. And so God doesn't engage. He just, okay, very well. You don't want to repent. Now let's go and see the woman. So to the woman, he says, what is this that you've done? He's saying it's all your fault. What do you have to say? And now listen, God gives her own chance now. Okay, he doesn't want to repent. Do you want to repent? And she presumably could have made the free will choice. You know what? It is my fault. And, I did give him the fruit. I saw it and I just wanted it. I just wanted it more than anything I'd ever wanted before. And I just gave in. And I don't even know why. And I'm sorry. Please forgive me. She could have said that. Instead, she says, it's a serpent. Serpent deceived me and I ate. It's his fault. No repentance. And so then God moves on to the serpent. And interestingly enough, God does not give the serpent an opportunity to repent. He doesn't ask the serpent, what's your version of events? Isn't that interesting? He doesn't treat the serpent with the same dignity that he has given his two image bearers. He tries to actually have an intimate, personal, conversation with them. With him, it's just immediately, because you've done this, not what have you done, because you've done this. Here's what happens. And guess what? This is all in poetry again, because here's a really profound thing that I want you to think about. And he says, cursed are you from all the livestock and all the beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. So this is really interesting information, because when you were imagining the serpent talking to her this whole time, did you imagine something that could walk? Because now he can't walk anymore. He's taken that away from him. Did you imagine something that was clever and can talk and could apparently walk, and who also seemed to, before this, could enjoy really good food, love good food, love some good ravioli, whatever, vegetarian ravioli back then, right? But now he's going to go on his belly. He's not going to be able to walk anymore. Now he's going to eat dust. He's going to be able to enjoy good food. So we had a serpent that can walk, talk, really smart, likes good food. What does that look like? If you think of anything in the animal kingdom, like a dragon, maybe. But also kind of like a person, right? He's a lot more person-like than animal before this. So whatever the serpent is before this scene, he is something that looks a lot like a human, but he's not a human, he's an animal. And now we look like he used to, and now he looks like that slithering thing. That's what the story is telling us. And then he goes on to say, and I will put enmity, or they're going to be enemies, between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. Oh, there's this seed thing again, all the way back from day 3. That's day 3 language. Something about day 3 and seed. And so there's going to be this animosity, this rivalry, this war between the serpent and the woman, and between his seed or his descendants and her descendants. Okay, so what does that mean? It's not talking about baby snakes fighting baby humans someday. We're going to see in the next story that we won't get to today, but you read between the lines, and it becomes really clear who the descendants of the serpent are, the children of the serpent. Jesus will actually use this same language when he's talking to the Pharisees, and he says, "You brood of vipers." Why does he say that? He says, you are exactly what this was talking about. You've become, he actually says, you're children of your father Satan. So apparently, it's not about genetics, it's about allegiance. It's about who you affiliate and identify with, whether you too will be like the serpent and be ruled by desire, or whether you will choose to be means to be really human and be ruled by truth, and what is making decisions based on truth and what is not true. But then what's crazy is we have seed, and it's sort of like, it can be plural, right? So it's mentioning multiple descendants. The serpent's going to have descendants. The woman's going to have descendants. It's going to be these kind of two factions at war with each other. But then there's going to be a unique seed, and it's going to be a he. So some baby boy is going to be born someday of a woman. And he's not going to fight the seed of the serpent. He's not going to say he's going to strike your seed's head. He's going to strike your head. He's not going to fight against all those who have made their affiliation with the serpent. He's not coming to fight them. He's coming to fight the source. He's coming to address the head of the snake. And that head he's going to crush. But as he crushes it, he's going to be wounded also. He's going to be struck by your deadly venom. So there's just something in here about a baby boy being born someday that's going to totally defeat evil and sin and desire gone wrong. And he's going to do it by sacrificing himself to take it out. And it's something to do with third day. Really ambiguous. I don't know what that could be about. But there it is on page 3 of the Bible, right? There's the gospel on page 3 of the Bible. So he starts in reverse order. So he talks to the serpent, then he goes back to the woman. And the woman, he says, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. And in pain you shall bring forth children. So it seems to be, this is not a curse, by the way. This is curse. He uses the word curse to the serpent. He doesn't, we get this wrong all the time. We talk about the man and the woman. God cursed them. He doesn't curse them. But there are consequences. And he says, because of what you've done now, you're still going to be fruitful and multiply, but it's going to hurt a lot more. Like it's going to be a painful experience. It wasn't meant to be painful, but this is the decision you've made for yourself. You've made things harder on yourself. And it says, and also, what's happened now has damaged not just how you multiply and are fruitful, but now it's actually damaged your relationship with the one person that you're meant to be closest to in all your human relationships, which is your husband. He says, you're going to have desires now. There's that desire again. You're going to have desire in you, and he's going to have desire in him, and your desires aren't going to always match up. You're both ruled by desire now. You see the world through what you want, and you're going to want different things. And when you want different things, guess what he's going to do? He's going to rule over you. You used to be equal partners, but now, because of what's broken in him, and part of what's broken in him we saw on the previous page is he doesn't trust the woman anymore that God gave him. She's got to be kept in control. She's got to be kept, for her own protection and the protection of the rest of us. Can't let women make decisions anymore, right? And this isn't God's design. This is the result of sin. This is the result of the fall. Is now there's competing interests, and it means somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose. And so he's going to use his brute strength to overpower and get what he wants when you want something different than him. And this is like in the context of God's like, I am sad that this has happened now, because this is not what I wanted for you. And then we get to the man, and he has more to say to him. And so to humanity, because that's his name is humanity, Adam, he said, because you have listened to the voice of your woman and have eaten of the tree which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. And then he makes another poem. And again, don't misunderstand this. He's not saying you shouldn't ever listen to your wife. That is not at all what he is saying. What is he saying? You have listened to the voice of your wife instead of my voice. You chose your wife's voice over my voice. Later on, there'll be echoes of this when, Abram's been promised descendants and they're not showing up, and Sarai his wife gets this idea, hey, let's just use our Egyptian slave named Immigrant and abuse her and make a baby with her against her will, and then everything will be okay. And it says, and Abram listened to the voice of his wife Sarai. And it's an echo of this. That was not God's will. She said something that was contrary to the voice of God. And in that moment, he should have been able to distinguish what God's will is true. Any other voice that's contrary to God is false. And he should have made the decision based on truth and false. True and false. And God said, because you didn't do that, and instead you listened to a contrary voice, and the point isn't that it was the woman, it could have been anyone. But in this case, it was the woman. This is what's going to happen now. Not cursed are you. He doesn't curse the man, doesn't curse humanity, but cursed is the humus because of you. The soil, the land, the earth itself has been damaged because it's connected to you in a spiritual, intimate way that you can't even understand. And now because of what's gone wrong in you, this whole earth is now in a state of rebellion with you. And it's even you have authority over it, but it's going to fight you tooth and, like before it would have just given you, great things. But now in pain, you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat the plants of the field, and by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the humus, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. You are going to die, by the way. I said, I told you would surely die. I didn't mean immediately, but now it's inevitable, though. You will die. You're going to die. And this is the consequence. This is not what was meant. Again, this is not God, angry God, and throwing down punishments. This is sad God saying, let me tell you what you just did. Let me put it in terms you can understand. This is the consequence. This is the result of the choice that you have just made. And this is not the world I wanted for you. But we still have this hope lingering out there from what he said. If they were listening to what he said to the serpent, there's still this hope that at some point a baby boy is going to be born that's going to put this thing back together and figure this out. We don't know what that's about yet. But okay, but we move on with the story. So this is how we end the story today. And so the man called his woman's name Life Giver because she was the mother of all living. And for those of you who think, oh, that's cute, this is actually a line. I really feel like when you read it and you really understand the story, like you're supposed to cry when you read that. Like that is so sad. Like this is the fulfillment of what he just said to the woman. Your desire shall be contrary to your man, but he shall rule over you. Right? Because what does it mean to name something? She already had a name. Why does he suddenly need to give her a name? Because now he's going to take authority over her. He's going to show her who's boss. She's not going to do anything without his permission. And what was her name before this? And it wasn't woman, because woman is a descriptor of her gender. He's man, and his name is humanity, not man. Her name isn't woman. It's a descriptor of her, but it's not her personal name. What's her personal name? Helper is another descriptor of what she is, but it doesn't say, and God named her helper or anything like that. God named humanity. What did he name the woman? Well, think about it. They started off as one being or two. One, right? From this story, like this other perspective on the creation, they're one creature that has a name, humanity, and then it gets divided into two persons that come back together as one flesh. What's their name? Humanity. Humanity and humanity. Actually, you'll see this in Genesis 5. It actually calls this out specifically. When God made them, male and female, he named them humanity. They had the same name. Because why do they need different names? Yahweh God is 3 in 1. He doesn't need different personal names for each of the 3. They're all Yahweh, by the way. The Father, the Son, and the Spirit are all Yahweh. They have one name because they are one, even though they're 3. Humanity was 2 in the beginning, but they had one name because they were also, in a very real sense, one. And they had a unity with one another that we can, I think, have a hard time imagining. Like they could finish each other's sentences, I think. Like they literally were one in 2 bodies. And so they didn't need separate names. If God said, hey, humanity, come over here, both of them would come running. And that's like totally normal. Like they did everything together. They were one. They had unity with each other. But now that unity's been broken. And now he looks at her and he doesn't see a mirror reflection of himself. He sees something other. He sees something maybe dangerous. Something that needs to be put under control. And she's not going to share his name with her anymore. She has to have a new name. And so he gives her a new name. So that's, like I said, sad. That's a sad line. And we've been trying to recover from that damage ever since. And then Yahweh God made for humanity and for his woman. Notice, God never calls her life giver. God doesn't respond to, like he does that, but God doesn't like ratify that. He doesn't say, okay, yeah, I'm going to call her that. In God's mind, there's still humanity, the man and the woman. And he makes for them garments of skins and clothed them. This is, again, another sad, like, oh. Like, when I read this in the Middle East, like, people, like, are just, like, hang their heads. Like, we think, oh, that's nice. God made better clothes for them. Some nice, supple leather or whatever. If you ask anyone in the Middle East, if I were to give you clothes made out of animal skins, are those clean clothes or unclean clothes? In a heartbeat, they'll say unclean, shameful. We don't wear animal skins. Linen, okay, cloth, fine, but animal skins, that's unclean clothing. So God's saying in a message like, you can dress up like a tree all you want, you've chosen to be animals. And so now you're going to be dressed like animals. This is, again, not God punishing them as so much as like hitting home, this is the consequence of, this is the choice you've made. You can come, we're going to see, like this isn't the end of the story, thankfully, that God's going to make a way to come back from this. But this is the choice that they've made for themselves. And then he goes on to say, and behold, the human has become like one of us. There's that one of us again. Discerning good and bad. Now lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat forever. And like, it's almost like there was more, and then God kind of stops mid-sentence. And so he sends him out from the garden of delight. He exiles him. This is, again, a pattern we're going to see over and over and over again. A temptation, giving into desire, taking what doesn't belong to us, and then a fallout from that sin, which ultimately leads to exile. And they are exiled from that garden, and he cast out the human at the east of the garden of delight. And you'll see this also, that's constantly moving east. And Cain then falls, and he moves east, and Israel sins and falls, and they are taken into exile east, this east language. And it's like, again, it's like a regression. It's like going backwards instead of forwards. And he placed the cherubim, the fiery sword, whirling to guard the way to the tree of life. And that's where we're going to end today. And so the cherubim, this is kind of interesting word. So cherubim, it's plural for cherub. They are a specific kind of supernatural spiritual being. They are the guardians of the royal heavenly throne room. And so like in the mind of ancient people, a king like the Pharaoh of Egypt, he's not just hanging out in his throne room and anybody can just walk in there and say, "What's up, Pharaoh?" Or, "Die, Pharaoh, I'm going to stab you now." Like they have bodyguards. Same way that the President of the United States doesn't go anywhere without like Secret Service protection, and there's snipers on every rooftop around them at all times, like, right? Like, because he's the president. And so the king has his bodyguards, his throne guardians. And in their imagination then, well, that makes sense that then God would have some kind of beings that guard the boundaries and the borders between the royal presence of God and everything that's outside of it. And they kind of act as the gatekeepers of what gets to come in and out based on God's will. And so that's where cherubim show up, and not just in like Jewish thought, but like even in the word actually comes from Babylonian word, because the Babylonians had an idea of these things. And you see a picture of them in Ezekiel, and they look like this weird, bunch of different animals and wings and things and faces. But the point is that they're supernatural and powerful and scary. And so there's a boundary. So this place of this special presence and intimacy with God is now closed. And this cherubim is guarding it, and there's a fiery sword. And he's specifically guarding the way to this tree of life, which seems to represent immortality and eternal life. So that's like this door has now been closed to us. The only other time cherubim are going to show up again in the Torah is later on in the Exodus story when God gives them instructions to build the ark. And there's going to be these cherubim kind of like sculpted on the top of the cover, and they're like kind of like their wings folded over it, like kind of protectively. And you know what goes into the ark? One of the things that goes into the ark that they're now guarding is the Torah itself, the scrolls of the Torah. And so it seems to be saying that this tree of life and what it is and what it represents has now, like our way to interact with it is now in this. And whereas before Moses, like the way to the tree of life was being blocked off, now there's cherubim there, but they're almost kind of like protectively like inviting us in and like welcoming us into this presence. But there we go. So that's where we're going to stop. Then you have this wonderful story. The next, one, I encourage you to read that in your own time, and then just find all the repeats and the repeated language of what we just read happens there. So that's why I say, like, the summation of this story of the Bible is that this world is good, which doesn't seem to be so. When we look at it, we read the news, we see the things in trafficking and wars and diseases and all of this junk. And yet the Bible is saying that's not actually true. Like, what you see is not what's actually true about how this world was made and the one who made it. That this world's actually very good. The God who made it is very good. But the reason it's so messed up is we actually have real human freedom to make decisions, and we've made a mess of the place. But God is not going to let that stand. He's not going to let that story end that way. And that from the very beginning, from the very opening pages, he had already decided on a plan of action that was going to result in undoing the damage that has been done and ultimately restoring this world back to what seems to be the same state we saw in the first two chapters, but even better, because when you look at the last chapter of Revelation and then compare that to what we read today, you'll be like, whoa, there's the tree of life there, and then there's rivers, and there's the gates, but now the gates are open to the tree of life, and everyone can come in, and nobody's wearing animal skins. They have clean white robes. Like, it seems like everything has been restored, but at even greater extent, because now we don't even need the sun anymore, because Christ himself is our light. So there you go. That's the story.